Scottie Maurice Pippen. To many people, he's the greatest Robin to ever play in the NBA, and others don't even think that title is positive enough, as they claim that the Bulls dynasty was more of a Superman and Batman type of dominance. When you look at the Bulls' 6 championships in 8 years, there's no question that Scottie was an integral part of their success, and that there's absolutely no way Jordan's legacy is what it is today without his 6'7" wingman by his side. But the thing that's often forgotten, overlooked, or just never realized is that Pippen had a lot of legacy-defining moments after Michael Jordan retired from the Bulls in 1998, and I think the twilight of his career is significantly more fascinating than most people realize. After the Bulls had their last dance season, winning their 6th championship ring in franchise history, general management was determined to head in another direction and prove that they could rebuild the organization into a younger championship contender. As a result, Phil Jackson was given the door, Michael Jordan retired, and a 33-year-old Scottie Pippen was traded to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Roy Rogers and a 2nd-round draft pick. In hindsight, this was one of the worst trades in Bulls history, as Rogers and the 2nd-round draft pick never amounted to much of anything. On the other hand, Pippen was heading to Houston, where he was joining a starting lineup that included Hakeem Olajuwon and Charles Barkley. Now sure, when you look at an image of these 3 legends in the same uniform, it certainly looks like a super team. But before you completely jump to that conclusion, it's important to know the context of that situation. Charles Barkley was 35 years old and was not in the shape that he once was. Hakeem Olajuwon was nowhere close to his peak form, as he was 36 years old and had only played 47 games in the previous season due to injuries. Before Pippen joined, the Barkley, Drexler, and Olajuwon-led Rockets only had a 41-41 record in the 97-98 season, and they were eliminated out of the first round of the playoffs. Hypothetically, at an earlier time, a trio of Barkley, Olajuwon, and Pippen may have been one of the greatest teams of all time. But at this point, Pippen was basically joining a retirement home for NBA superstars. The 98-99 season was also a lockout-shortened season, with what I believe was the most grueling schedule in league history. Because the league took so long to agree upon a collective bargaining agreement, regular season games didn't start until February 5th of 1999. This meant that teams had to play 50 games in just 90 days. Quite often, teams had to play games on back-to-back-to-back nights. At one point, Houston had played 9 games in just 13 days. This non-stop schedule was going to be especially brutal on an older team like the Houston Rockets. With that being said, the Stars put in their best efforts, as Pippen and Olajuwon played all 50 games, and Barkley played 40 out of the 50 games. Throughout the regular season, Pippen averaged 14.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, 5.9 assists, and 2 steals on 43.2% shooting, which was reduced numbers from his previous season in Chicago. But some of that may have been because of the fact that he had to share the ball with more offensively minded stars in Houston. He provided the team some fast break basketball and was the anchor of the squad's perimeter defense, which is why he earned a first-team All-Defense selection. The Rockets finished the regular season with a 31-19 record, securing the 5th seed in the Western Conference playoffs. In the first round, they were going up against a much younger Lakers team, led by Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. This is where things first got weird for Scottie's career after Jordan. In this specific series, Scottie likely had the worst playoff game of his career and the best playoff game of his career. Houston narrowly lost Game 1 with a final score of 101-100, but Pippen did his part, putting up 14 points, 10 rebounds, and 8 assists. But in Game 2 in Los Angeles, the Lakers were on fire from the field, while Scottie couldn't get anything going, as he scored just 3 points on 0 of 7 shooting from the field. After this performance, the narrative was beginning to swirl in the media that Pippen had reached the end of his productive career. With his abilities in question and in a 0-2 hole against a younger squad, Pippen responded like the proven champion that he is, and in Game 3, he completely took over, as a helpless Kobe Bryant could do nothing to slow him down. Scottie dropped a playoff career high of 37 points and added 13 rebounds and 4 assists on 44.4% shooting, as he played all 48 minutes. He did all of that while a superstar teammate Hakeem Olajuwon only scored 5 points on 2 of 12 shooting. This resulted in a much-needed blowout victory for Houston. But in Game 4, the Lakers handled their business, closing out the series in the 4th game. Scottie attempted to go down fighting, and although he filled up the stat sheet, he didn't do it very efficiently, as he had 19 points, 17 rebounds, 5 assists, and 2 steals, on only 6 of 23 shooting. At the conclusion of that season, a frustrated Scottie requested a trade, and part of that frustration was because of his poor relationship with Charles Barkley behind the scenes. Later on, Barkley expressed his thoughts on Pippen requesting a trade, saying, "For him to want to leave after 1 year, it disappointed me greatly. The Rockets went out of their way to get Scottie, and the fans have treated him well, so I was just disappointed in him." To this, Pippen responded publicly by saying, "I wouldn't give Charles Barkley an apology at gunpoint. He can never expect an apology from me. If anything, he owes me an apology for coming to play with his fat butt."
Well, he said he would never apologize.
Not even at gunpoint.
But as you know, I always carry a gun with me. So there is a chance. There's a chance. I'm gonna go to my truck and get my gun and see. So if I get arrested for murder, y'all know he didn't apologize. If we ever see him.
As a result, the Rockets did meet Pippen's request and traded the small forward to the Western Conference contenders, the Portland Trail Blazers. Portland was a very talented yet youthful team that was in desperate need of veteran experience and leadership, and Pippen was seen as the suitor for that role. Due to his increasing age, Scottie's minutes took a significant dip from his season in Houston, but he remained an all-around productive player, as he played all 82 games, averaging 12 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, and 1.4 steals on 45% shooting. He was also honored on the NBA's second all-defensive team. With a well-rounded, remarkably deep roster, the Portland Trail Blazers finished the regular season with a 59-23 record, which was good enough for the second-best record in the entire league, behind only Shaq and Kobe's Lakers. At that time, heading into the playoffs, everyone believed that these two Western Conference powerhouses were on a collision course to meet in the West Finals, but that was yet to be seen. In the first round against Kevin Garnett and the Minnesota Timberwolves, Pippen led his team in points, rebounds, and steals as they comfortably eliminated the Wolves in just 4 games. Then in the semifinals against Stockton and Malone of the Utah Jazz, Pippen led the Blazers in assists and steals, while eliminating the Jazz in just 5 games. Now the stage was set for the Lakers and Blazers, as Pippen was going up against his former championship-winning head coach. At this point in history, the Western Conference was considered to be much stronger than the East, and the belief was that whoever won this series out west would easily go on to prevail as NBA champions in the finals. In Los Angeles, the Lakers convincingly won Game 1, regardless of the fact that Pippen dropped a solid 19, 11, and 5. The Blazers then dominated Game 2 in Staples Center, stealing away home court advantage in the series. And in that game, Pippen dropped 21 points, 11 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3 steals on 60% shooting. Then stunningly, the Lakers won Games 3 and 4 in Portland, taking a demanding 3-1 lead in the series. Up to that point, no team had ever come back from a 3-1 deficit in the Western Conference Finals, so everyone was basically assuming that this was coronation time for the Lakers. But the Blazers had other plans, and showed their fighting spirit. In a do-or-die 5th game, Pippen showed up with a clutch performance, leading the Blazers in scoring while being a menace defensively. On the night, Pippen dropped 22 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 6 steals, and 4 blocks on 67% shooting, resulting in a 96-88 victory. Then, back in their building for Game 6, the Blazers convincingly controlled the game, forcing a Game 7 in Los Angeles with a final score of 103-93. Under Scottie Pippen's leadership, the Blazers were just one game away from completing one of the greatest comebacks in playoff history, but they were going to have to do it in Los Angeles. The Blazers had the momentum on their side, and that continued after the tip-off of Game 7. For the vast majority of the game, the Blazers seemed to be in complete control, and Staples Center was awfully quiet. At the end of the first quarter, Portland had a 7-point lead, and at the end of the third quarter, that lead had increased to 13. Pippen was having himself a solid game, and through 3 quarters, he had 12 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 assists, leading his team in 2 of those stats. But that's when seemingly everything changed. When the fourth quarter began, the Lakers were blistering hot, while the Blazers couldn't buy a bucket. For an 8-minute stretch of the fourth quarter, the Blazers didn't convert a single field goal, missing a total of 13 straight shots. Scottie Pippen specifically had 0 points on 0 of 3 shooting with 3 fouls and 1 turnover. In a quarter, he desperately wishes he could have back. Shaq, Kobe, and the rest of the Lakers had completely stolen the momentum, and the rest was history, as they defeated the Blazers in Game 7, eventually going on to win the NBA championship over the Indiana Pacers. Many people don't realize this, but given the fact that the West was expected to dominate the East, regardless of who the conference winners were, Scottie was basically 1 quarter away from winning another championship ring as the leader of his squad. He was 1 quarter away from defeating Phil Jackson and surpassing Michael Jordan in the championship ring count. Unfortunately, this was Pippen's last real shot at an additional championship ring, as his Blazers were swept out of the first round of the playoffs in the next 2 seasons by the clearly superior Lakers team, meaning that Pippen was eliminated by the Lakers in 4 straight seasons. At the end of the day, Scottie Pippen is much more than simply a sidekick to Michael Jordan. But when we look at his career post-Jordan, we see that he had one of the weirder rollercoaster finales of an NBA Hall of Famer, as it included drama, remarkable highs, and some terrible, remarkable lows. Recently, Scottie Pippen had a birthday and turned 58 years old, and on social media was tons of people giving their perspectives on his career and legacy. The thing is, in this current day of basketball discussions, it's so hard to get an honest perspective on the value and impact of Scottie Pippen. And let's just point out the elephant in the room. It's obviously because of the tired debate of Jordan versus LeBron. As much as I hate it, unfortunately, this seemingly never-ending debate has influenced and permeated just about every corner of basketball conversations. Some Jordan fans have an agenda to minimize Pippen's impact, in an attempt to make Jordan appear even greater. And on the other hand, some LeBron fans try to elevate Pippen's greatness to the point that he was basically an equal to Jordan in an attempt to diminish MJ's success. As a grown man who thinks tying your emotional state to a basketball player is pretty pathetic, my only agenda with this video is to give an honest and hopefully insightful perspective on Pippen that will result in plenty of views and help me get my new truck. So without further ado, let's get into it. Over the last couple of days, I've been seeing one specific Pippen quote from 2015 circling the internet all over again. He said, "I was LeBron before LeBron. They want to compare him to the greatest, whether it's MJ or Magic, but he's closer to myself." It's important to keep in mind that Pippen made this comment 8 years ago, which was before LeBron's 3rd championship in Cleveland and long before his 4th championship in Los Angeles. So Pippen's perspective on this comparison may have changed since then. As far as his comparison to LeBron, I can see it in a sense, stylistically. Both players were big and long, physically gifted athletes who were tremendous threats in transition. But the most apt comparison is probably the aspect of the point forward. Despite the fact that both of these stars played primarily at the small forward position, both of them were known to be the main facilitators of their squads. But that's about the point where the comparison ends for me. Unlike LeBron and Jordan, Pippen was a bit of a slow bloomer, as he only averaged 7 points per game in his rookie season, and didn't start a single game that year. He didn't clearly establish himself as the Bulls' second best player until his third year in the NBA, which was the 1989 to 1990 season. Along with that, Pippen also developed slowly as an offensive player, as he didn't average at least 20 points per game until his fifth season in the league, which was during their second championship run in 1992. This brings me to my next observation that people sometimes fail to recognize. Pippen was somewhat limited offensively. Without question, he was one of the greatest two-way players in basketball history. But in no way, shape, or form would I ever consider Pippen as an elite scorer. He was a great slasher and became a decent three-point shooter as his career went on. But he didn't have the best dribbling skills, he wasn't fantastic with his back to the basket, and he sometimes struggled to reliably make a play for himself. With Jordan on the roster, at his best, Pippen scored 21 points per game, and when Jordan retired in 1993, many people expected Pippen to then assert himself as an elite scorer with extra opportunities. Well, that didn't end up being the case. Pippen's scoring did go up without MJ, but it was only marginal, as he went from roughly a 20 points per game scorer to 22 points per game in 1994 and 1995. I remember in the Last Dance documentary, Phil Jackson referred to Pippen as possibly the second best player in the entire league, only behind Jordan. But that seemed like a crazy claim to me. During his prime, I don't remember people considering Pippen as a better player than Karl Malone, Charles Barkley, Patrick Ewing, Hakeem Olajuwon, David Robinson, and so on. Pippen was one of those guys who did almost everything well. He scored well, he facilitated well, and he defended well. But without being an elite league-leading scorer, he seemed to always be held back from being in the conversation of the best players in the league. Now, is that fair? Personally, I think so. Ask yourself this: how many players are referred to as superstars that never got close to averaging 25 points per game? Some facilitators might, but they're usually playmakers on another level entirely, like Magic Johnson and Isaiah Thomas. So maybe Pippen gets a little overpraised at times as an offensive player, but what he doesn't get praised for enough is his all-time great defense. There is a debate on who's the better defensive player, Michael Jordan or Scottie Pippen. Personally, I think it depends on how you look at it. Michael was more of a risk taker. He was the defender who was more likely to leave his man in an attempt to trap the offensive player with a double team. He would also often sneak up on the shooter as the help defender attempting to block his shot. Michael was more likely to abandon his man in an attempt to jump the passing lane and get the steal. When it worked, Jordan looked amazing, but when it didn't, the Bulls usually allowed a basket because of it. On the other hand, Pippen wasn't as much of a risk taker. Instead of daringly trying to force turnovers as often as MJ did, Pippen usually just locked up the opposing player with his smothering on-ball defense. With his lateral speed and remarkable hustle, Pippen's greatest gift defensively was his ability to stay in front of the offensive player at all times, often forcing them into a more difficult shot. The fact that he never won the Defensive Player of the Year award is kind of ridiculous, as he was consistently seen as the standard of excellence for wing defense. So if you ask me, was Pippen the LeBron before LeBron? I don't think so, as he was too limited offensively to earn that title. Was he ever close to being the second best player in the NBA? Again, I also don't think so, as players like Karl Malone, Hakeem Olajuwon, and David Robinson were elite defenders while being in the race for the scoring lead, which is something that Pippen could only dream of. On the other hand, it's a travesty that Jordan won a Defensive Player of the Year during his career, but Pippen did not. Because in terms of pure on-ball defense, I believe Pippen was definitely the best on their first three championship squads. So was Pippen the kind of player who you would consider as a franchise-leading superstar, who could have been the best player on a championship team? Honestly, I don't believe so, but he was the perfect teammate to Michael Jordan. In the exact areas where Michael needed help is the areas where Pippen was strong, like defense and distributing. Because Scottie was able to handle so much of the other responsibilities on the court, Jordan was able to focus so much of his energy on dominating the game with his scoring. A good example of that would be their averages during their playoff runs in their 6 championships. In those playoff runs, Pippen averaged more rebounds, more assists, more steals, and more blocks, while MJ obviously scored way more points. Like on most things, the truth lies somewhere in between. Pippen was a vital aspect of the Bulls winning 6 championships, and MJ certainly couldn't have done it without him. But due to his limited abilities as a scorer, he shouldn't be elevated to the level of a top 3 player in the league, or being compared to LeBron James. That's simply too much in the opposite direction. Let me take you back in time. It's October 6, 1993, and the Chicago Bulls are currently the defending NBA champions, just recently winning their 3rd straight title, making themselves the first team to three-peat since Bill Russell's Celtics in the 1980s. Michael Jordan seemed as if he was at the height of his powers, coming off of an NBA Finals series where he just averaged 41 points per game. He was the most famous sports athlete in the entire world. But unfortunately, after the tragic passing of his father, James Jordan, just a few months earlier, Michael Jordan shook the basketball world by abruptly announcing his retirement, which was effective immediately. Obviously, this was overwhelmingly stunning news to the media, to the league office, and to basketball fans around the world. But after the dust settled, one of the biggest questions that remained was how this would affect the Chicago Bulls' playoff chances moving forward. The Bulls' 28-year-old superstar, Scottie Pippen, was now being thrust into a position that he had never been in before in his basketball career, and that was the role of a leader and as the best player on a professional team. As unfair as the burden of responsibility was, it was now Scottie Pippen's job to fill the shoes that were left empty by the legendary Michael Jordan. But he would be doing it with some extra help. And that offseason, the Bulls made several major acquisitions. One of those was the sharpshooting guard Steve Kerr, and the other was the versatile 6'10 small forward Tony Kukoc. The Bulls were coming off of a year where they had finished the regular season with a 57-25 record under the leadership of Michael Jordan. With MJ now out of the picture and only several new role players to replace him, the Bulls seemed to be a wild card heading into the 1993-94 regular season. Adjusting to a Jordan-less offense would be no easy task for Chicago, and because of this, the regular season got off to quite the rough start. By late November, it was appearing as if it was going to be a disastrous lottery season, as the Bulls were sitting 3 games below 500 in the midst of losing 6 out of their last 7 games. But it was right at this point that things finally started to click for Chicago. And first and foremost, finding his groove was the team's new leader, Scottie Pippen. Although he didn't become a league-leading scorer like some expected after the departure of Jordan, he did assert himself as a more well-rounded team leader, as he did a little bit of everything for Chicago. Over the course of the season, Scottie led his team in points, assists, and steals, while being second in rebounds and blocked shots. With Pippen operating as the point forward in Phil Jackson's triangle offense, the Bulls started executing beautifully on a nightly basis, quickly establishing themselves as a contender in the Eastern Conference. At the end of the regular season, they had a 55-27 record, which was good enough for the 3rd seed in a strong Eastern Conference. Scottie Pippen finished that season 3rd overall in the league MVP race, and at this point, many fans in the Windy City were starting to imagine a scenario that they once thought was impossible. The Bulls might just win their 4th straight championship even without Michael Jordan on the roster. As early May was approaching, Michael Jordan was figuring out his place on the baseball diamond, while his former team, the Chicago Bulls, were preparing for their postseason run. Their first round matchup was against the 6th-seeded Cleveland Cavaliers. This was a Cavs team that they had met in the playoffs in the previous 2 seasons, and the Bulls won on both occasions. But with a talented star point guard at the helm for the Cavaliers by the name of Mark Price, they thought that this might finally be their opportunity to eliminate the Chicago Bulls out of the playoffs. But they couldn't have been more wrong. Scottie Pippen had a monster series, averaging 25 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 steals. And as a result, Chicago swept the Cavs in just 3 games. For years, it was Michael Jordan who was known as the Cavalier Killer, as he was torching Cleveland on both ends of the court and hitting game winners time and time again. But now, the Bulls had just convincingly swept the Cavs without MJ. It goes without saying, the team's confidence was now at an all-time high. But waiting before them in the Eastern Conference semifinals was their greatest test yet. It was their rivals, the physically punishing New York Knicks. In the 2 years prior with MJ, the Bulls had had long playoff battles with the Knicks that ended in 6 and 7 games. Historically, they had always been one of the toughest teams for Chicago to get through. So they believed if they were able to win this series, they would absolutely have what it takes to win the championship. What proceeded was an absolute dogfight. As expected, the series opened up being extremely physical and defensively minded. And after the first 2 games in New York, the Knicks had a 2-0 series lead. There was several famous, iconic plays that occurred in this series, and the first came in Game 3. To put it simply, this contest was absolutely wild, as a crazy brawl broke out that was started between the Knicks' Derek Harper and the Bulls' JoJo English. But despite the altercation clearing the benches and spilling over into the first row of the fans, this was still only an appetizer for the drama that was ahead. With less than 10 seconds left in the game, the Bulls had the ball and were up by 2 points, with the shot clock winding down. Entrusted to take this shot was the Chicago leading star, Scottie Pippen. But with a somewhat limited bag offensively, he was unable to create a good look and didn't get off a shot, as the shot clock expired with the ball in his hands. On the other end of the court, Patrick Ewing hit a running hook shot to tie the game at 102. Now the ball was going back to Chicago with 1.8 seconds left on the clock. A frustrated Scottie was looking for an opportunity to redeem himself with another attempt at a game-icing basket. The thing is, the Bulls head coach Phil Jackson had something else in mind. He decided to set up a play where the inbounds pass would go to Tony Kukoc, who had made several game winners throughout the regular season. Scottie was irate at Phil's decision, and in a protest, he refused to go back into the game altogether. Regardless, Kukoc went on to take the inbounds pass and swished the game-winning jumper, proving the fact that Jackson did know what he was doing. Despite the victory, the post-game locker room for the Bulls was described as incredibly tense and very somber. The Bulls center, Bill Cartwright, gave an emotional speech where he called out Scottie for quitting on the team. Now here's the thing. When you see this in the documentaries, and when you see the mainstream media break down this series, usually they make it seem like the series ended then and there, with Scottie's selfishness ultimately being the team's downfall. But that wasn't in fact the case, as Pippen and Chicago bounced back in a major way. The next game in the series was a must-win for Chicago, and Scottie came through mightily as he dropped 25 points, 8 rebounds, and 6 assists on 10 of 21 shooting. Thanks to this clutch performance, the Bulls won the game and tied up the series at 2 games apiece. The series was now returning to New York for a pivotal 5th game, and what ensued was once again a classic close battle. With just over 7 seconds left in the 4th quarter, the Bulls were up by 1 point, and the Knicks had the ball as they were inbounding the pass with a chance to take the lead. What happened then is simply one of the most controversial foul calls in NBA history, which Chicago fans referred to as their phantom foul. The elite perimeter shooter Hubert Davis catches the ball at the top of the key with a clean look at the basket, but Scottie Pippen closed ground quickly and contested the shot. And NBA referee Hugh Hollins blew the whistle right as the shot was being missed. When you look at the instant replay, you can see that Davis was trying to sell the contact before Pippen had reached him. And even then, it's hard to tell whether or not Pippen actually made any contact with him whatsoever. If the referee doesn't blow that whistle, then the Bulls win the game and take a commanding 3-2 series lead back to Chicago. And in Chicago, for Game 6, the Bulls went on to dominate the Knicks, which included one of the greatest dunks in NBA history, Pippen's disrespectful slam on Patrick Ewing. But unfortunately, that's only a hypothetical, because the ref did blow that whistle, and Hubert Davis went on to hit 2 free throws to win the game for New York. Ultimately, the Knicks went on to win the series in the 7th game at home. But personally, I always felt like that game never should have happened in the first place. Yes, Pippen had that awful, selfish moment in that series, but sadly, he never got that true opportunity to redeem himself with a potential NBA Finals run. Because of this massive, history-shaping call by Hugh Hollins, this season for Scottie Pippen and the Chicago Bulls will remain as one of the biggest what-ifs in franchise history. If you ask me, one of the most controversial and polarizing players in the history of the game is the Chicago Bulls 6-time champion small forward Scottie Pippen. Some act like he was the only reason Michael Jordan was ever successful, and some even go as far as saying that he was the true GOAT and the player who was most responsible for the Bulls' 6 championships. Seriously, these people actually exist. Then there's the other side of the extreme, which is the narrative that Pippen was not a legitimate superstar and was a guy who was carried to success because of Jordan's greatness. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not a person who leans toward either extreme, as I fully recognize that Jordan was the best player on the Chicago Bulls in 80 to 90% of the games they played. But I gotta say, I'm seeing too many people today diminish all of Pippen's contributions that may have ultimately been the difference in whether or not they won various championships. Today, I'm highlighting the instances where Scottie Pippen outshined his teammate Michael Jordan during their championship runs. And let me know in the comments whether or not you believe Scottie Pippen gets enough credit for these performances. So without further ado, let's get into it. First off, Game 3 of the 1997 NBA Finals against the Utah Jazz. Everyone remembers Michael Jordan's legendary shrug game, where he tied the NBA Finals record for the most three-pointers made in a single game. Well, no one ever mentions the fact that Pippen broke that franchise record just a few years later. On that evening, Pippen was sniping at an all-time great rate, as he made a total of 7 three-point shots. On the evening, Pippen finished with 27, 4, and 4 on 54% shooting, to Jordan's 26, 6, and 3 on 41% shooting. Ultimately, Scottie's valiant effort was in vain, as the Jazz won the game with a final score of 104-93. Next up is Game 5 of the 1991 NBA Finals against the Los Angeles Lakers. Once again, this was a contest where the majority of the credit went to MJ, as he trusted his teammates down the stretch and leaned heavily upon John Paxson to make open shots when Jordan kicked it out to him. But again, no one ever mentions how Scottie was the top performer in their first championship clinching game. On the night, Pippen had 32, 13, 7, and 5 steals on a true shooting percentage of 59%. Compared to MJ, who had 30, 4, 10, and 5 steals on a true shooting percentage of 57%. Thanks to this dominating performance from both players, the Bulls won with a final score of 108-101. Next is Game 6 of the 1992 Eastern Conference Finals against the Cleveland Cavaliers. At this point in time, the combination of Mark Price and Brad Daugherty made the Cavs legitimate title contenders, and they were no easy out for Chicago. You would think that the Bulls star who closed it out with an efficient scoring performance and earned their second straight trip to the finals would have been Michael Jordan, but in this case it was actually Scottie, who dominated basically every aspect of the contest, as he dropped 29 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, 4 steals, and 4 blocks on 48% shooting, compared to MJ, who had 29, 8, and 8 on 37% shooting. Thanks to this complete controlling effort from Pippen, The Bulls won the series with a final score of 99-94. Next is Game 2 of the 1993 Eastern Conference Semifinals against the Cleveland Cavaliers. In search of their first three-peat, the Bulls once again found themselves in a matchup with an impressive Cavs team. In this case, it was a more well-rounded team effort for Chicago. But make no mistake, Pippen was the player of the game in this one as well, as he dropped 19 points, 6 rebounds, 7 assists, and 4 steals on 53% shooting, while MJ had 18, 5, and 6 on just 44% shooting. Ultimately, the Bulls won with a final score of 104-85. Now you can't really say that Pippen saved the 1993 championship with this performance, because the reality is the series was never really in question, as the Bulls swept the Cavs 4-0. But regardless, there's no doubt that Scottie definitely did his part in their trip to the finals. The next one is Game 3 of the 1993 Eastern Conference Finals against the New York Knicks. Whenever these two rivals met up, it was guaranteed that there would be plenty of intensity and a physical style of play. Because of this, these contests were often low scoring, with lower field goal percentages. But that wouldn't be the case for Pippen on this night, as he brought his A game and put up strong numbers of 29, 4, and 4 on a lethal 83% shooting, while MJ had 22, 11, and 8 on a terrible 17% shooting from the field. Thanks to Scottie carrying the offense, the Bulls won the game with a final score of 103-83. Next on the list is Game 3 of the 1996 first round against the Miami Heat. It was yet another series that the Bulls were heavily favored to win, but on this night, Pippen especially made sure that there would be no upset. Like many times in his career before, Scottie was an absolute force on both ends of the court, as he put up dominant numbers of 22 points, 18 rebounds, 10 assists, and 3 blocks on 50% shooting, while MJ had 26, 3, 2, and 3 steals on 43% shooting. Miami never stood a chance, as Pippen's triple-double led Chicago to a 112-91 victory. Last on the list is Game 3 of the 1996 Eastern Conference Finals against the Orlando Magic. Most of you off the top of your head know how this series went. The 72-10 Bulls swept the 64-win Orlando Magic, and usually the narrative was that Michael Jordan executed his revenge after being eliminated by the Magic the previous season. But on this night, the revenge was all Scottie's, as he put up 27, 6, and 7 on 79% shooting, while MJ had just 17, 7, and 4 on 36% shooting. This performance from Scottie is especially impressive when you consider just how low scoring the affair was, as the Bulls won the game in dominating fashion 86-67. Again, let me be fully transparent and say that if I was to make a video about the playoff games where Michael Jordan outshined Scottie, then that video would be 1 to 2 hours long. The point of this video is not to diminish MJ's impact as a perennial championship leader, but rather it's to emphasize the impact of the great Scottie Pippen, whose contributions are often far too slept on. And regardless of your opinions on him since his retirement, his resume as a winner certainly deserves the respect. Today, we're talking about a player with one of the most polarizing legacies of all time. The legacy of Scottie Maurice Pippen. You guys know plenty about Pippen's legacy. He was one of the greatest wing defenders the league has ever seen. He was a capable scorer and a perennial all-star and a 6-time NBA champion. So you may be asking yourself, why even bother making this video if we already know so much about Scottie Pippen? The reason why I think this video is necessary is because no one seems to agree on the greatness of Scottie Pippen. He's one of the most difficult players to rank on the all-time list. Some say he's extremely underrated, while others say he's grossly overrated. In 1997, Scottie Pippen was voted by NBA representatives as one of the 50 greatest players of all time, but even this sparked plenty of debates and controversy, because some felt he wasn't as worthy of that honor as some of Pippen's peers. There's one thing we can blame for the confusion on the greatness of Scottie Pippen, and that is the shadow of Michael Jordan. The instant you bring up Pippen within a conversation about the greatest players of all time, there will be people who look at you funny and who will quickly dismiss him, because obviously Jordan deserved most of the credit and was the leader of those championship teams. Because Scottie was the Robin to Jordan's Batman, it's hard for people to clearly see Pippen's true greatness or lack thereof. He was a sidekick, and during his prime, we almost never got to see him outside of his role as a sidekick. With that being said, Pippen is easily the most accomplished sidekick of all time. In this video, I'll be tackling the career of Scottie Pippen and taking an in-depth look at his stats and his game so that we may finally and definitively come to a conclusion on just how great Scottie Pippen actually was. Let's take it back to the beginning of Scottie's career. Scottie Pippen was entering the NBA draft in the 1987 season, coming off of a senior year at the University of Central Arkansas, a season in which Scottie averaged 23.6 points, 10 rebounds, 4.3 assists on near 60% field goal shooting. He was selected 5th overall in the 1987 NBA draft by the Seattle Supersonics and was traded to the Chicago Bulls for Olden Polynice and future draft pick options. On a quick side note, the Supersonics really blew it with this trade because on their roster, they had offensive-minded all-stars like Tom Chambers, Dale Ellis, and Xavier McDaniel, who were all in their mid to late 20s. Adding a defensive anchor like Scottie Pippen almost certainly would have made them perennial contenders in the Western Conference. Instead, Pippen started his career in Chicago with an already established Michael Jordan who was in the middle of an MVP season. Pippen's career actually got off to a slow start and needed to develop his game over time. He only played 20 minutes per game in his first year and didn't start a single game for the Bulls, averaging only 7.9 points, 3.8 rebounds, and 2.1 assists per game. Regardless of the slow start, the coaching staff and Pippen's peers still saw great potential in the young small forward. The obsessively competitive Michael Jordan specifically matched up with Scottie during most of the Bulls' practices. Throughout the years, many have credited Pippen's strong development both offensively and defensively to Jordan pushing him in those early years of Bulls practices. The maturation was slowly starting to show. In his second season, Scottie started 56 games on 33 minutes per game while increasing his averages to 14.4 points, 6.1 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game on 47.6% shooting. With Scottie's help, Jordan and the Bulls reached the 1989 Eastern Semifinals for the first time in over a decade for the franchise. Unfortunately, Jordan and Pippen were not ready to dethrone the star-studded Pistons and were eliminated 4-2. It wasn't until Scottie's third season that he really started to break out into a star. He played and started all 82 games for the Bulls, earning his first All-Star selection of his career, while again increasing his averages to 16.5 points, 6.7 rebounds, and 5.4 assists and 2.6 steals per game on 49% shooting. Pippen was now beginning to realize his potential, and with Jordan having his first All-Star supporting teammate of his career, the Bulls looked poised to finally defeat their bitter rival, the Detroit Pistons, in the playoffs. The teams met in the 1990 Eastern Conference Finals, and it was an epic series that was to be decided in the 7th game of the series. Unfortunately, Scottie was dealing with a severe migraine heading into the deciding game, an issue that had labored him for several times in his career. Pippen had decided to play and try to push through the pain, but it would have been better if he didn't. Pippen was clearly not himself in the deciding game and shot a horrendous 1 for 10 from the field. The Bulls never stood a chance, losing the game 93-74. The following season was Pippen's best yet. He increased his averages again, scoring 17.8 points, 7.3 rebounds, led the team in assists with 6.2, and averaged 2.4 steals on a very efficient 52% from the field. This was also the first season Pippen was recognized as one of the elite defenders in the league, as he made the NBA second team all-defense. His team-leading 6.2 assists was also a correlation of his prominent and growing role within Phil Jackson's triangle offense, as Pippen was the team's main facilitator from the perimeter. With Pippen now beginning to reach his potential, Jordan had all the help he needed, and the Bulls destroyed the rival Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals, sweeping them 4-0. The Bulls went on to defeat the Lakers in the 1991 NBA Finals, winning their first championship in what was the beginning of a dynasty. Scottie Pippen would be an All-Star the next 6 straight years. He went on to make a total of 10 all-defense team selections, lead the leagues in steals for a season, and won his famous 6 championship rings. During his time as a Chicago Bull, Scottie was always a supporter to Michael Jordan's Batman, except for one small sample size of a season and a half. This sample should weigh heavily on how we define Scottie Pippen's legacy. At the end of the Bulls' first three-peat in the 1993 season, Jordan announced his retirement from basketball in order to pursue his love for baseball. In Jordan's absence, Pippen emerged from his shadow. That year, he earned All-Star Game MVP honors and led the Bulls in scoring, assists, and blocks, and was second in the NBA in steals per game, averaging 22 points, 8.7 rebounds, 5.6 assists, 2.9 steals, and 0.8 blocks per game, while shooting 49.1% from the field. For his efforts, he earned the first of 3 straight All-NBA first-team selections, and he finished third in the MVP voting. The Bulls had made key additions that season of Tony Kukoc, Steve Kerr, and Luke Longley, and had finished the Jordanless season with 55 wins, good enough for the third best record in the Eastern Conference. Pippen had taken the reins as leader of the defending champion Chicago Bulls, and he wasn't just doing a good job, but an excellent one. The Bulls comfortably swept the Cavaliers in the first round of the playoffs, and that set them up with a matchup with their physical rivals, the New York Knicks. Pippen continued to lead the Bulls through the series, and although Pippen produced quality averages of 22 points, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists, the Knicks' physical defense was clearly affecting his efficiency, as he shot only 40% from the field that series. The two teams battled hard deep into the series, and in the 6th game, Pippen made the most iconic moment of his career. Midway through the third quarter, Pippen was on a fast break, charging towards the basket as center Patrick Ewing jumped up to defend him. Pippen utterly posterized Ewing, absorbing contact and a foul, and slammed the ball through the hoop. Pippen proceeded to walk over the destroyed Ewing. He then taunted both Ewing and iconic Knicks fan Spike Lee, who was standing courtside. Pippen received a technical foul for the taunting, but it was worth the moment. That has since been immortalized in the great moments of playoff history. The Bulls handily won the game, pushing the series to a 7th game. In the 7th game, Pippen scored 20 points and added a monstrous 16 rebounds, but ultimately didn't receive enough help, and the Bulls were eliminated 87-77. Despite the MVP caliber season from Pippen, trade rumors were swirling the following season. The rumors involved a potential trade that would send Pippen to the Supersonics for Shawn Kemp. During the 94-95 season, Pippen was asked in an interview if he thought he'd be traded, to which Pippen responded, "I hope I am." You see, the Bulls were dominant in the 90s as we all know, but there was certainly no shortage of drama between the players and Jerry Krause, the team's general manager. That's another video I'll make down the road. But what's important here is that Jerry and Pippen were both sick of one another, and with the Bulls struggling that season after the loss of Horace Grant in free agency, Pippen was ready to split. That is, until Jordan announced his plans to return to the team late into the season. After Jordan rejoined the team, the Bulls were soon returning to their winning ways, but not without Pippen first validating himself as an MVP candidate and making some history too. At the end of the 1994-95 season, Pippen led his team in every major statistical category: points, rebounds, assists, blocks, and steals. In the entirety of NBA history, only 4 other players have accomplished that feat. Dave Cowens, Kevin Garnett, LeBron James, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. That's some pretty damn historic company. After seeing the totality of Pippen's accomplishments, I think it's fair to see why he's easily one of the 50 greatest ever. In the small sample size without Jordan, Pippen was an MVP candidate. He's one of the greatest defenders ever, he's a great all-around player, and he was a great facilitator for the Bulls. Pippen was a reliable and capable scorer, but he was never a pure dominant scorer. Pippen was always an offensive player who played within the flow and system of his team's offense, but he wasn't the type of player who often erupted in hot scoring bursts. Even in Pippen's lone full season without Jordan, Pippen's shot attempts per game only increased a little over 1 shot a game over the previous season with Jordan. He never averaged over 22 points per game and never shot more than 18 shots per game. But other than not being quite a transcendent scorer, Pippen was remarkable in just about every other aspect of his game. Honestly, the player who reminds me the most of Scottie Pippen in today's game is Kawhi Leonard, and I don't believe that to be a knock on either player, but each player should find that flattering. Both were pretty good scorers, they had a similar height, build, and playing style. Both started slow in their careers, but matured in their game by leaps and bounds throughout the years. Both were also all-time great defenders. To me, the type of career Kawhi Leonard had had so far is the type of career Scottie Pippen could have had if he had never played alongside Michael Jordan. Despite this video, I'm sure Scottie Pippen will continue to have a legacy that sparks plenty of debate. Let me know in the comments section if you agree or disagree and just how good you believe Scottie Pippen actually was. There is one rule to success that everyone must know in the NBA. No one can do it alone. Usually it takes two, if not more. Today, I'm breaking down my list of the top 6 greatest duos in NBA history. And let me tell you, creating this list is hard. Sure, you may know who your top picks are, but ranking certain duos above others can simultaneously feel justified and blasphemous. I'm sure many of you will be triggered by my rankings and by my omissions, so let me know in the comments how you're much smarter and how your list differs from mine. Starting off at number 6, Larry Bird and Kevin McHale. These two are the biggest reason why the Boston Celtics dominated the Eastern Conference in the 1980s. What's truly special about this tandem is that you could argue that they're the two most all-around efficient scorers ever at their positions, as Bird had a 5-season stretch where he had 50-40-90 percentages, and Kevin McHale is one of the few players who shot 60% from the field and 80% from the free throw line in a season. These were their averages over their careers as teammates in Boston, and although they were elite offensively, they were also a problem defensively, as Bird made a total of 3 all-defense teams and McHale made a total of 6. This tandem won 3 NBA championships and 5 finals appearances, and although Robert Parrish also had a significant impact for their success, make no mistake that McHale was the second best player on that team during the peak of their success. Number 5, LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. In reality, this duo won the fewest championships together out of any pairing in my top 6, but the dominating fashion of their winning was enough to earn their spot on the list. The initial collaboration of LeBron, Wade, and Chris Bosh had people referring to them as the Big Three Heat, but it didn't take very long for people to start treating them as a duo instead. Together, these stars made it to the NBA Finals in all 4 of their years as teammates in Miami, and they won the NBA championship in 2 of those instances. Easily, their most impressive run came in the 2012 to 2013 season, where they famously won 27 straight regular season games, which is still the second longest streak in NBA history. A very underrated aspect of their success was their solid defense, as the Heat were a top 5 team in their first 2 years with a Big Three, and the players who deserve the most credit for that is obviously LeBron and Wade. These were the averages of LeBron James and Dwayne Wade over that memorable 4-season stretch, and honestly, based on their talent, they could have been even higher up the list if they had been teammates for a longer period of time. Number 4. Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. The fact that possibly the two greatest shooters in NBA history both play on the same team is pretty crazy. Obviously, their story is still being written, but even with plenty of basketball still ahead of them, they're securely on my list. As teammates, they've won 4 NBA championships, but just 1 Finals MVP, which does hold them back a bit on this list. These are the statistics of the two stars in their years as teammates, and although it's clear that Steph was always the better player, there's no question that Steph doesn't win his championships without Klay Thompson's two-way efforts, and without his clutch Game 6 performances. Although Steph Curry is best described as a decent defender, Klay, on the other hand, is the ultimate example of a 3-and-D player, as he has the 2019 All-Defense Team appearance to go along with his lethal three-point shooting. I can imagine that with 4 championships, I'm gonna receive some criticism for not ranking these two higher. But when you consider that Kevin Durant was there for half of them, and they only have 1 Finals MVP between the two of them, you could certainly argue that there's a lot of other players who deserve a massive amount of credit outside of that tandem. Number 3. Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. The instant Magic was drafted to the Lakers in 1979, he had the all-time great Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as a teammate. Kareem's best seasons individually were with the Milwaukee Bucks in the 1970s, and since he was much older than Magic, the prime of their careers never completely overlapped. But they were both incredible and considered as elite players in the early 1980s. These were their career numbers as teammates in Los Angeles, as both greats were always offensive threats that had to be respected. As a dynamic and dominating tandem, they won 5 NBA championships together and 4 Finals MVPs between the two of them. One of the most beautiful aspects of their offensive attack is that Magic was their strength in transition, as he always loved to push the tempo, while Kareem loved to operate in half-court sets, relying heavily on his nearly unstoppable skyhook shot. No matter which way the defense tried to contain them, the Lakers had an answer for it, as Magic could dominate with his style, or Kareem could dominate with his. In the late 80s, you could definitely argue that the best tandem on the Lakers was actually Magic Johnson and James Worthy, due to Kareem's slow decline in his twilight years. So in a sense, 2 of their 5 championships together actually qualify as Magic and Worthy championships from the duo perspective. In my opinion, this aspect keeps Magic and Kareem from being placed any higher than 3rd on my list. But regardless, they were still one of the greatest 1-2 punches to ever do it. Number 2. Shaquille O'Neal and Kobe Bryant. If you're talking about peak ability and the individual quality of each superstar, then it probably doesn't get any better than prime Shaquille O'Neal and a young Kobe Bryant. In their first championship run, it was clear that Shaq was the significantly better player and the more productive player. But after that first title run, Kobe took a massive leap forward, and the duo operated more as a Superman and Batman type of tandem. In their 8 years as teammates, they went to the NBA Finals 4 times and won 3 NBA championships, with Shaq winning all 3 Finals MVPs. The most noteworthy championship was their historic 15-1 postseason run, where they swept through the stacked Western Conference, solidifying their argument for the title of the greatest team in NBA history. These were the stats of Shaq and Kobe during their time as teammates, and although Kobe got off to a relatively slow start, the meat and potatoes of this tandem was between the years of 2000 and 2003. Both of these players had the talent and the ability to be a championship leader on their own respective teams, which is part of the reason they butted heads so much as teammates. But that's also what made them so special, as they sometimes looked like a 1A and 1B option rather than a 1 and 2. This is my list of honorable mentions. Obviously, there's a lot of other greats here, and solid arguments can definitely be made in their favor. Should any of these duos have made it into the top 6 instead? Let me know if you believe so. Number 1. Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen. Was there ever really a question on who would get the top spot? Sure, you could argue that tandems like Shaq and Kobe, LeBron and Wade, and Magic and Kareem were more talented duos. But from the perspective of consistency and how the stars complemented one another, it doesn't get any better than Jordan and Pippen. Depending on who you ask, Jordan is possibly the greatest scorer in NBA history. And although Pippen was never a league-leading scorer, he did consistently chip in around 20 points per game, in an era where offense was much harder to come by. But without question, their greatest strength as a duo was their all-time great perimeter defense. In their years as teammates, Jordan was first-team All-Defense 9 times, and Pippen was first-team All-Defense 6 times. They were both so elite on defense that it was a genuine debate on who the better defensive player was. And please let me know in the comments who you believe is the better defender. Together, they won 6 championships in a span of 8 years, with Michael Jordan being the Finals MVP all 6 times. These are the career numbers of the two greats as teammates, as the two were constantly a nightmare for opposing teams on both ends of the court. Honestly, I expect my picks of 2 through 5 to be highly scrutinized, but personally, I don't see how anyone could disagree on the top spot on this list, as Jordan and Pippen remain as the model of excellence when it comes to the all-time great 1-2 punches. In this new Ultimate Team series, I make the best team I believe possible, picking players from all eras of NBA history. It isn't just about how talented the teams are, but I'm also trying to build teams that would gel and execute well together. Today, we're looking at the Ultimate Bulls team. Before I get started, here are the rules you need to know. To build each franchise's ultimate team, I will be picking a starting 5, a second unit representing each position, and then 3 additional rotation players at any position I choose. In total, there will be 13 roster spots. It's worth mentioning that I will not simply be building these teams based on how talented each player is, but I'll also be factoring in how well these players would do together as teammates. So without further ado, let's get into it. Starting at the point guard position is the sensational and explosive Derrick Rose. His peak may have been short-lived, but before the ACL tear, he was one of the best players in the entire league, as he was the youngest MVP winner in NBA history, securing the award at just the age of 22. Not only was he one of the fastest players in the game, but his ability to finish around the rim was absolutely lethal, as he had a dangerous layup package and amazing mid-air body control, reminiscent of another former great out of Chicago. In his heyday, he was the floor general of a strong and defensively minded Bulls team, and on the Ultimate Squad, it will be more of the same, except just a million times better. Starting at the shooting guard position is a guy who was pretty decent at basketball, Michael Jordan. What do I have to say that you guys don't already know? MJ is arguably the greatest two-way player in basketball history, as he has 10 scoring titles and 9 first-team all-defensive selections. Basically, all the post scoring will be covered thanks to this 6'6" guard, and with Jordan's clutch gene providing his playoff scoring average of 33 points per game, he'll certainly make Chicago a force to be reckoned with, regardless of who they're matched up against. At the starting small forward is the 6'7" slasher Scottie Pippen. Right next to Jordan, Pippen will make the perimeter defense an absolute nightmare for opposing guards. But beyond that, Pippen will help the Bulls execute in transition. And between Rose, Jordan, and Scottie, they'll have one of the most terrifying fast break trios of all time. I wouldn't necessarily describe Derrick Rose as a pure point guard, so when it comes to facilitating, Scottie's contributions will be very appreciated as basically a point forward. Starting at power forward for this Chicago group is the man they call the Worm, Dennis Rodman. As if this team wasn't already stacked enough on the defensive end, Rodman provides yet another player who can claim to be an all-time great defender. Even against some of the other Ultimate franchise teams, the Bulls will still likely be winning the Battle of the Boards, as Dennis was the best rebounder throughout the 1990s, nearly getting as high as 20 rebounds per game over the course of multiple seasons. He won't be providing much offense, But with the wings on this roster, it's not like it's even necessary for their success. Now finally, we move away from the 96 Bulls, and starting at the center position will be the underrated center of the 1970s, Artis Gilmore. This 7'2" monster in the paint joined the Bulls in 1976 at the age of 27, and at his best, he was averaging about 23 points per game and 13 rebounds a game. Along with that, he was also a fierce rim protector, which is something the Bulls never had during their dynasty days of the 1990s. Obviously, he will be a massive upgrade from Luke Longley, which I'm sure Jordan and Pippen will appreciate. Now onto the second unit. The backup point guard will be the 6'3" sharpshooter Steve Kerr. Although the Bulls bolster a ridiculously powerful starting five, you may have noticed that one of the major things the roster was lacking so far is three-point shooting, and Kerr is simply one of the most efficient three-point shooters in the history of the game. At his best in 1995 and 1996, he shot over 50% from three-point distance in back-to-back seasons. With his remarkable ability to catch and shoot with extreme lethality, he will operate as a great floor spacer for a team packed with many dynamic wing slashers. The backup point guard will be the 6'7" wing Jimmy Butler. Although he's become most famous in his years since, many people often forget that the highest scoring season of Butler's career was actually in his youth in Chicago. In 2017, he actually averaged 24, 6, and 5 while hitting nearly 37% of his three-point attempts, which will be pivotal to this team. Jimmy Butler being the substitution for Michael Jordan basically means that opposing defenses will never be able to relax at any point of the game. The backup small forward is the 6'5" scorer DeMar DeRozan. He's only been with the Bulls for the last couple of seasons, but in that time, he's been an elite weapon offensively, averaging a career-high 27.9 points per game in 2022. If for some reason Scottie is struggling offensively, DeRozan will be a massive charge to the offense off the bench. The backup power forward will be the 6'8" star from the 1970s, Bob Love. Bob is one of the great forgotten two-way players of NBA history, as he made 3 All-Defense teams and was an elite scoring 4, getting as high as 25.8 points per game in 1972. He was a solid rebounder, meaning that he'll be a great substitution for Rodman as the Bulls continue to dominate on the boards. The backup center for the Bulls will be the 6'11" All-Star Joakim Noah. This guy was a consistent double-double player in his days alongside of Derrick Rose. Noah was also a frustrating presence in the paint defensively, and over the course of his career, he secured 3 All-Defense Team selections, including the 2014 season where he won the Defensive Player of the Year. Between Rodman, Gilmore, Bob Love, and Noah, there will never be a safe time for opposing teams to enter the painted area. And now for the 3 rotation players for this squad. The first of these 3 players is the 6'10" small forward Toni Kukoc. This talented wing will provide the Bulls with much needed perimeter shooting, and as a solid ball handler, he's very capable of making plays for himself or for others. Add in the fact that he's one of the best clutch shot makers on the entire team, and he might even see some minutes in crunch time. The second rotation player is the 6'10" power forward Horace Grant. He was a consistent double-double during his prime, and was the Bulls' third scoring option after Jordan and Pippen. He will provide low post stability for the team, both offensively and with the loose balls. The third rotation spot, and the final spot on this roster, goes to the 6'3" shooting guard Ben Gordon. This guy was an absolute bucket in his prime, consistently averaging around 20 points per game. He was an elite three-point shooter who made 40% of his attempts over the course of his career. He would usually take his game to another level in the postseason, which will be an added bonus to this team of postseason regulars. So here's a final look at the complete roster of this Ultimate Bulls team. Obviously, you have some of the greatest players of all time on this roster, but I gotta admit, the one major scary theme about this squad seems to be their suffocating defense, as both units provide some intimidating two-way threats. Here is my list of honorable mentions for the Bulls. To be honest, picking the final 3 roster spots for this group was extremely tough, Considering the quality of ballers who are still left on the board, should any of these players have made the roster instead? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.